Thanks. Again, this is Financial Preparedness 101 for disaster for farmers and ranchers. So I'm going to pass this over for a second to Jeff, but after Jeff, we'll hear from Winona Doris, who's done so much research for us and is going to be presenting a really robust, incredible program today. And I will tell you more about her in a second. But first, Jeff, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Kelly. I'm with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And I'll be covering a bit more of how we can assist, how we can help with preparation in preparing for a disaster. I cover a pretty wide area. I cover all the way from Sonoma County down to Santa Barbara County and out to the Central Valley. Been involved with several of the wildfires that have occurred over the last several years, particularly in Sonoma, Napa, and Santa Cruz County. So I have a lot of experience, both farms, ranches, and forest land settings. So I'm able to answer a lot of those questions if they pop up. And happy to be here today. And back to you, Katie.
So thank you so much, Jeff. Again, this should be an interactive workshop, so please pause us anytime if you have questions specific to Jeff. He'll be chiming in as well. You can also put your questions in the chat, and I will be collecting them, and we'll have Q&A throughout. So please be engaged. We want to hear from you too. So now we're going to switch over to Winona, and we're so glad to have Winona here. Winona is a farm business advisor with 20 years of experience advising business owners on accounting, tax, and insurance with a focus on empowering communities who are more at risk for injustice. She's the great niece of Ed Scott, a Mississippi sharecropper and claimant of the Pigford lawsuit and settlement. Through her family's history, she understands the effect of injustices and had on generations of people stripped of their livelihoods. She has a long career experience in finance and accounting as a CFO and a COO. She also holds a BA in economics and accounting, a master's in business administration, and a master's in taxation, and is licensed insurance agent and a tax preparer. Winona is also an awesome educator and runs a business accelerator for farmers and ranchers that you all should hear about at the end. It's called the Resilierator. And Winona has been so generous in sharing her knowledge today and putting together an awesome program. And I'm going to pass it right off to you, Winona.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, everyone. I have quite a bit to go through today, so I'm going to just jump right in. And of course, as Katie said, please, stop me at any time, raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and we can kind of take questions as we go, as well as at the end. So today, we just had our introductions of all the folks here on the call, and I'm gonna go a little bit high overview around wildfires. Really the reason why this material was put together, and the prevalence of wildfires and the effects that they're having on the ag community. And then I'm going to go do a little bit of deep dive on all of the wildfire insurance programs. And I've broken those down into four categories: insurance and loan, tax programs, farmland, forest, and infrastructure programs, programs for livestock, and programs for trees. And then we'll talk a little bit about preparedness to kind of really tease up the part 2 of this series that we're going to do on December 14th, and then we'll have more time for questions. All right, so just for level setting, I want to just kind of make sure that we're understanding the framework under which these programs apply. And there's sometimes the words hazard and disaster are used synonymously, but they're actually not the same thing. A natural hazard, as it states here, is a dangerous situation or event that poses a threat. And then when that hazardous threat happens and there's harm to people or property, then that is called a natural disaster. So that is the disaster. Then the government is interested in keeping food prices fair for farmers and consumers and ensure that there's adequate food supply, and they also want to protect and sustain our natural resources. Therefore, they enact legislation through the Farm Bill, which was last enacted in 2018, to authorize spending to provide assistance to food and farms in support of these goals, and to make sure that there's adequate food and that we're protecting our resources. So again, this is sort of the basis of this presentation today. The government and these government programs, we're looking for the newest updates on the Farm Bill, I think maybe next year. So the Farm Bill programs are accessed primarily through three agencies: Farm Service Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Services, where Jeff is from, and the Risk Management Agency. There are tons of programs for all types of disasters, which are primarily listed here. But the focus of this presentation specifically is on fire. So if you're hearing, anything that you hear in this presentation, even though I'm focused on wildfires, you also can look and see if there's a different type of natural disaster that you're dealing with, that program also covers that disaster. So a little bit of information about wildfires. So there's about 75% of the areas consumed by wildfires across the US. In 2020, and we saw a lot of wildfires in California, burning more than 4 acres. And then the stats that they've collected for 2021, they were about 8,835 fires affecting 2.6, almost 2.6 acres of land in California. Also in 2020, in California in particular, they had 6 of the 10 largest recorded fires happened in California. And wildfires, of course, as we know, it has devastating effects. It destroys your crops and your orchards and your livestock. It affects your soil, and the heat and the smoke destroys the outer layer crops. Then you get a wind, and the wind blows smoke, and it will affect lands and crops, even not even close to the fire. It ruins your equipment. And there's just a lot of harm that happens to farm owners and their families and their staff when they are suddenly lose their jobs, they lose their housing, their future income. And so a lot of the programs are focused on these specific types of problems and trying to mitigate them as much as possible. There are, in terms of like infrastructure effects, we have an increase of unemployment insurance claims when there's a wildfire. And then if there's coverage in that area for like fire suppression costs and staff and equipment related to transporting equipment and people to fight firefighters, so then you need more money for all of those things. And it really puts a lot of stress on state and local budgets to replace community facilities and infrastructure, lots of economic activity coming into the region. When you have a wildfire and maybe the roads are destroyed, or a bridge is destroyed, or something like that, or they lose electricity for a considerable amount of time, what happens to people that maybe you have a recreation business, and then that gets affected. So then that affects income coming into the community. So the effects on wildfires are pretty devastating across a lot of different sectors. In California in particular, in July of 2022, the California Insurance Commission did a convening to investigate some of the issues they were hearing about wildfires, because as you can imagine, with the rise in wildfires, what does that do for people and being able to get insurance? And what people were experiencing was their insurance rates were either going up drastically where they could no longer afford it, or they were just being canceled altogether because the claims within the insurance companies were causing such a financial hardship. So in 2021, Governor Newsom signed SB 11 to try to expand insurance coverage through the California Fair Insurance Requirements Plan, whereas previously agriculture was excluded. So then he included that. So things like that. So we'll go through all of those programs, and we'll go through, insurance programs in this presentation, but just to give you sort of the framework about why we think this material is so important. And as the owner of the farm or business advisor, if you are a business advisor to a farm, that you're thinking through these issues in advance. This is a little quote that I pulled that I thought was so interesting from this convening. It said, this Carissa Kraus, she said, we had so much unpredictability in what was harvested and whether those grapes would actually be made into wine. And just because they couldn't get a good test results back in time, they just left the crops on the vine. So that's even, an effect that happens from just a wildfire that carries, that either spreads or the smoke that ruins the grapes, you know, so you have to think through all of those things when you're dealing with this. Okay, so now let's dig in. Our first section is on insurance, loans, and tax programs. First program I want to talk about is crop insurance. So crop insurance provides coverage to growers for naturally occurring perils, including wildfires. There's federally subsidized multi-peril crop insurance. It's administered by the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation under the USDA. It does cover a broad range of perils, but the important thing about that is you have to purchase crop insurance before you plant. Before the crops are planted, you have to get the insurance. Once the plants are in the ground, you no longer qualify for this type of insurance. There's also state regulated private crop insurance. It covers a less narrow range of perils, such as hail, but it does cover hail and fire. It's not insured by the FCIC. It is more flexible because you can purchase it anytime, but of course, it's not going to get the same level of coverage as you're going to get with the federal crop insurance program. Then if you can't get the federal crop insurance program, then you can look at getting NAP insurance. So if you have uninsurable crops and you want to protect against natural disasters, this is really basic coverage. It's pretty inexpensive. It's deeply discounted for beginning and limited resource. So this is for, you're really thinking like your small beginning farmers who are a limited resource. There's a limit on NAP on this coverage. It's $125,000 per crop year per individual or entity. So you have to think about that. And some of these limits come into play later in some of the other programs where there's special provisions where they loosen the cap. All right, farm loans. You can try and get an FSA emergency farm loan to assist if you suffer a qualified farm related loss. To qualify, generally, you have to show that you had a 30% reduction in productivity or 30% reduction in the price that you were able to get for your crops, or if you had a physical loss for livestock or livestock products, real estate. You can borrow under farm loan programs actual production or physical losses to a maximum of $500,000. But there's a big but. There's a lot of paperwork and record keeping required with these programs that sometimes can be a bit onerous for folks. And this is where, sort of the preparedness part comes into play in terms of understanding, how not only how you access these programs and what paperwork and what records you need to have in place, but what do you have to keep even after that? What records do you have to give to them? You have to make sure that in these programs, it has to be a declared disaster. If it's not federally declared disaster, then you don't qualify a lot of times for these programs. You have to show that you've got sufficient farming and ranching experience. There's some requirements around like citizenship and residency. You also, because it's a loan, credit history comes into play. So sometimes people are not able to access farm loans because they don't have good credit or they don't have collateral. You also have to be able to show that you can repay the loan. How do you show that you can repay the loan? You need financial records. Then this is where accounting records come into play and tax returns and evidence of funds or the ability to have funds to repay the loans. And then again, the record keeping is pretty strict and can seem kind of strenuous. A lot of times with the farm loan programs, there's a financial management training program that you have to participate in. And they have flexible, somewhat flexible payment terms. You can choose 20, 30, 40-year payment terms, and you can borrow up to 100%. So that's an advantage. So the money's there to a cap of $500,000, but there is a lot of obligation on behalf of the borrower in terms of record keeping and maybe the class and good credit to be able to access. In the tax code, generally, if you suffer a casualty loss from a federally declared disaster, you can deduct the value of that loss on your taxes in the year of the loss. But also there's a provision that allows you to deduct the loss in the previous year, which can be advantageous, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But so there's federal casualty losses. It covers personal use property from federally declared disasters. And you're limited to the amount. You can deduct the amount not covered by insurance. So if you have a loss of $500,000 and your insurance covers you for $200,000, then on your tax return you can get the remaining $300,000. So you can double dip. There are disaster losses. Disaster losses covers personal, individual, and income producing property from federally declared disaster areas. This is sort of a county level declaration. So if the county declares a disaster in that county, then you can take advantage of that. And then there's qualified disaster losses that you can also take under FEMA, where it covers the loss of personal use property declared under the Stafford Act. So in terms of tax filings, you want to look up IRS publication 515, which is the sort of the handbook on casualty, disaster, and theft losses. You also want to look at publication 547. So just write those down. You can Google those later. And then you'll be looking at the file forms 4684 with your 1040, a Schedule D and or a Schedule 4790. So just if you want to write those down.
Could you say this again, Winona?
Yes. So the publications on
I got those. The second part.
Oh, the forms. Filing with the form 4684, Schedule D, and form 4797. So between the combination of those, you can claim your casualty, disaster, and losses.
Awesome. And Winona, just on the last slide where you were talking about people having the kind of onerous record keeping, what do you recommend for people to get support? Is that something that they would go through someone like you to get support for, or how would people get through that kind of intense?
Yeah, I mean, at a minimum, you need to have some sort of bookkeeping system where you have your financial records. Inside of those financial records will be proof of what you paid for the items that you would then be claiming and the value of those items. It will show the income, and so you need some sort of accounting bookkeeping. If you're not doing it yourself, then you should look to engage with someone on a permanent or, some sort of quarterly basis to produce those records. And if you're filing your tax returns, if you're doing an accurate tax return, the tax return starts with financial statements anyway. So you probably already have some sort of financial statement. But if you're going to look at being able to take advantage of some of these loans, then you just need to make sure that those records are pretty good, because they're going to take a look at those pretty closely. I think I've said all of this already about what you need in your records. Proof of ownership, that's going to be in your files, keeping your receipts and contracts where you've purchased things. The fair market value of the property that comes from your financial statements on your balance sheet. So if you have a balance sheet for your business and you look on there on the balance sheet and you don't see any assets, then you're not really prepared to get a loan, because you're not showing that you have property to cover for either tax recovery or insurance. So you may need to do some balance sheet cleanup. And again, you can get some help by getting yourself a bookkeeper to help you with that. Really, there's a lot of accounting emphasis around tax and insurance, and any of these programs where you have to prove that you have the assets and what they're worth. And then you want to consult an accountant or a tax advisor for any of these. I see there might be some questions in the chat, Katie.
Yeah, I'm going to pause you real quick. There was some on insurance that we can go back to, but since we're on tax provisions, the question from Amber: how does tax provisions work if you are a farmer who is leasing and doesn't own the land?
So I'd have to go back in, but I think you can get some recovery for the part that you are, for the part of your loss, right? So I'd have to go back and take a look again at that exactly. But so the owner of the land is going to experience some losses, and you also will experience some losses, maybe probably different, right? So just thinking through this, the owner of the land, to the extent that they've lost their property, will have some losses, and you may have some losses from any property that you had that was sitting on the land that is owned by you, or some disruption in your business or something like that. Those where your losses are. So you just have to be able to separate who's losing what. You really have to have an interest. That's what they say in the insurance world. Do you have an interest in it? Do you have value that you can lose in that? So I would look at that same thing for tax purposes. What are you actually losing? And then consult with your tax advisor as well for that.
Great. Thanks, Winona. And then going back to insurance real quick, Amber had asked two-part question. Just A, could you speak to that unlike car insurance, which after a claim is made, the premiums can go up, that it seems like with crop insurance, they expect you to make a claim every year. Can you speak to that a little bit? And then also, why would a crop be non-insurable? How do you determine that?
Okay, so tell me again the first question about the insurance.
She was just noting that with crop insurance, they expect you to make a claim every year. Whereas if you make a claim on something like car insurance, your premiums would go up. Amber, you can also unmute yourself if you want to clarify that.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Amber.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thank you. So I actually hopped on a crop insurance training like a week and a half ago up in Placer County, and the presenter was saying exactly that, right? Like you're paying a premium up to maybe a max of like 75 or 80% of what your total, valuation is.
Yes.
But because you're paying a premium the whole time, they expect that, yeah, you're going to have problems in ag, right? Like fire, frost, pests. And so I guess a lot of folks didn't know, and I didn't know until hearing that, right, that your premium doesn't continue to rise just because you're making a claim, which is totally different than other insurance models. So I just thought maybe if you could just like clarify that piece. It's kind of unusual, and maybe new to other folks.
Yeah. I think, I'm not a crop insurance specialist, but that's good to hear. I do know, and that makes sense, right? Because crop insurance is a federally subsidized program, and it's to the, in the government and reaching its goals is to make these programs accessible. And of course, a rising premium makes these programs not accessible. So they can continue to subsidize and covering recovery for farmers, and by keeping those premiums low. And of course, those programs are built because you can anticipate some sort of disaster. It may not be a wildfire, but there are crop losses. That's a very normal thing to happen, in ag. So, and then the second question was,
how do you determine if a crop is uninsurable?
I don't know exactly how you would do that. I would talk to a crop insurance specialist about that. I don't know.
Great. Thanks, Winona. And everybody else, if you are interested in crop insurance, we'll be hosting a workshop on that in January that'll be specific to a couple of those big programs. So you can save your questions for that too if you have more detailed questions.
Awesome.
All right, go ahead, Winona.
All right, next section. So now we're going to get into talking about farmland, forest, and infrastructure programs, specifically for those. First one we'll talk about is the Emergency Relief Program. It provides benefits to producers affected by wildfires, droughts, hurricanes, those other such things during the calendar year 2020 and 2021. Here's sort of some information on what it covers: losses to crops, trees, bushes, and vines, for a disaster for which federal crop insurance or NAP coverage was available, right? So this is an add-on program. The advantage a lot of times for this type of program, so if you sign up for crop insurance or NAP coverage, they already have collected information from you, right? So it makes these types of programs more accessible because they already have information about your farm and your crops. And then you can sort of move through those processes theoretically pretty easily, or easier, I should say. And in fact, if you have a loss and you receive a NAP insurance coverage payment, then you automatically will receive a pre-filled application for this program, right? Which does not mean that you guarantee eligibility, but again, because they already have your information and they are intending to help, then they automatically just send the application to you, and then you can, to help out, you can move on with the process. But there is additional paperwork required for this program, including, remember I talked about that $125,000 exemption. So there's also a process to apply for an exemption so that your recovery isn't limited to that. So that's in addition to, another thing, I know we're talking a lot about wildfires here, but also sort of think more broadly around what other related disasters could happen, like excessive wind that carries fire. So even if you don't have a fire directly, but there was a fire in some other area and there was excessive wind that carried fire to your area or carried damage to your area, then you qualify under these programs. So you should, it would be worthwhile to take a look if you have a disaster loss at all of these programs to see if they've provided provisions for your type of loss to be covered. Under the Emergency Conservation Program, this is for farmers and ranchers to repair damage to their farmland or conservation structures. It requires an inspection by the FSA and to determine the risk of future conservation programs. So this is the motivation of this program, the purpose of this program is conservation, right? And so that land, eligible land used for commercial farming, ranching, and orchard operations qualifies here. Nursery stock or Christmas tree plantations, grazing for commercial livestock production, things like that, and conservation structures like waterways, terraces, windbreaks, things like that qualify for this under this program. It covers up to 70.
Quick question, Amber asked, can you clarify? My understanding is this program is a cost share one. So producers still have to have money up front to replace fencing, et cetera, and then they're reimbursed up to 75% of the total cost typically.
Yeah, I think you're right on that, right? Because it covers up to 75% of the cost to implement the restoration. Amber, you should be a guest teacher. You've got some good info there.
I jumped the gun. Your slide answers the question, so sorry about that.
No, I appreciate it. I think it's great to like chime in. I love that. It covers up to 90% of the cost to implement improved restoration practices if you certified as limited resource or socially disadvantaged. There's a $500,000 cap per person or legal entity per disaster. Sometimes they do allow advance payment, and the documentation of the damage is required, which, is pictures, video, things like that they require. Again, you should talk with the FSA about it. And of course, they're doing an inspection, so they will come out and assess as well. The advance payment that you can get on this program is up to about 25% of your expected cost share. Under the Emergency Forest Restoration Program, this is for non-industrial private forest land for emergency measures to restore land damaged by natural disaster. So the land must have existing tree cover or had it before the natural disaster. It has to be owned by a non-industrial private individual, group, or association. The FSA will determine land eligibility using their on-site damage inspections, and you get up to 75% again of approved restoration, limited to $500,000. This can cover, so just so you know, these programs can cover debris removal, site preparation and planting materials, the cost of labor to replant, restoration of like firelands and fuel breaks, erosion control structures, fencing, tree tubes or shelters, tree shelters, things like that. The next program, Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So this is for farmers, ranchers, and non-industrial private forest land to cover soil erosion protection, minimize harmful invasive plant proliferation, protect water quality, things like that. So this program varies by state or county, and the payment rates are developed for each different conservation practice scenario. So there are online, you can find these payment schedules that are released at the start of each fiscal year. In October, they have new schedules that come out. It tells you how much they pay. And the payments may be, but your payments may be limited for in aggregate for years of participation, and they also may be capped based on your adjusted gross income as per your tax return. So you can find, you know, if you look up this program online, and there's some resources at the back of this presentation where you can go and find more details. There's quite a bit of detail on all of these programs, but I'm giving you just the highlight. But just know that there could be some caps here, and there's a table under which your payment schedule is determined, and you can look in October for the new schedule. Emergency Watershed Protection Program. This is for communities to protect infrastructure and land from additional flooding and soil erosion. This program does not require a disaster declaration by the federal or state government, but it does require a sponsor, so a local sponsor or a legal subdivision of our state or tribal government. Sponsors are cities, counties, towns, conservation districts, or federally recognized Native American tribe or tribal organizations. If there's interest from the public or private landowners, you have to go through a sponsor to make access of this program. And the landowners can apply for assistance through a floodplain easement when the funding is available. Again, it covers these types of projects: removing debris, reshaping and protect eroded stream banks, restoring or correcting damaged drainage facilities, anything, you know, repairing conservation practices, things like that, because this falls under the conservation area of protection, preparing your levees and your structures. Any questions on any of those programs before we move into livestock? Great. All right, the Livestock Forage Disaster Program. It provides benefits to livestock owners and contract growers who, as a grazed forage crop producer, very important, suffer loss of grazed forage due to drought or fire. So first of all, the U.S. Drought Monitor must have rated that you're in a D2, D3, or D4 drought area, that you have had either a severe, extreme, or an exceptional drought during the 2021 calendar year. And so these programs are created in this year, but what you also find is that they are extended and renewed and expanded. So I'm giving you the year in which these programs, you know, the way the rules read, and we are waiting to see what's going to happen for 2022, probably extended or expanded on some level. If also under this program, if you are not allowed to graze because of wildfire and you're on federally managed lands, then you can make access of these programs. To apply for this recovery, you have to submit your application 30 days after the end of the calendar year of loss. So by January 30th of the calendar year. So even if you sustain this loss in February, you have until January 30th of the next year to apply. There is criteria for this program based on type of species of livestock and ownership status, the disposal time and reason that you disposed of the livestock. Their production and maintenance has to be commercial, not recreational, not for hunting, pet roping, or show. There are those same qualifications around citizenship and residency that apply here. And there are time restrictions on ownership. So if it's, you have to own it or be under contract to own it 60 days prior to the event, prior to the drought or fire. The cap here on this is 125,000 per person or legal entity per year. And you have to provide and as I said, you got 30 days after the end of the calendar year that you sustain the loss to submit your application. There are lots of other reporting requirements around here that if you go, I just want to give you the heads up, I didn't list them all here, but there are other reporting requirements. Again, emphasizing that there are a lot of programs out there, but having records is critical to being able to access these programs. The Emergency Livestock Relief Program, this is anchored to the previous program. So in order to make access of this program, you have to be a member of the Livestock Force Program and apply. So then that means you have to qualify under the Livestock Force Program. And then also, once you do that, you qualify for this Emergency Livestock Relief Program. And you have to have, here's a list of all of the additional forms that you have to have on file to access this program. The Livestock Indemnity Program is for livestock owners or contract growers, poultry and swine only, for livestock death in excess of normal mortality due to eligible loss conditions. So eligible adverse weather events, wildfires is one of those that is expressly included as an adverse weather event. Again, you have to have owned the livestock, held for commercial use on the day that the livestock died or injured, if the livestock was injured as a result of the eligible loss condition, which wildfire is an eligible loss condition. It also covers if you lose revenue, if you have to sell your livestock at a reduced price because of injury from the eligible loss, then you qualify for recovery under this program. And generally on death, 75% of the average farm market value of the livestock reduced by compensation you receive from the owner. In the case of contract growers is what you're eligible for. So again, you can't double dip, but there are limits, and there are national payment rates for this program as well that you can look up. And generally you get this national rate minus any other amount that you receive, like at sale or recover from some other place. So when you go, if you're looking into this program, you look it up, you'll see the criteria. For 2022, you have to apply in the physical location of the county where the loss incurred. The deadline to file the notice of your loss is 30 days of when the loss is apparent. So within 30 days, you have to file a notice that you sustain a loss. And then you have 60 days after the calendar year to get your application in. So don't miss, that's important. So if you're trying to apply under this program, you've got two important critical deadlines. 30 days, you have to notify that you sustain a loss. And then after 60 days, so then you get another 30 days to submit the application. The kinds of documents that you need: the number and kind of livestock, the weight when you sold it, the evidence that you sold it at a reduced price, so actual sales receipts, and then show that it was at a reduced price, show evidence of comparable sales and showing that your price was lower, facility receipts, processing plant receipts. Those are the kinds of records that you have to substantiate the claim. Any questions on livestock?
Yeah, Winona, Amber had a question. Do you know how animal injury is defined? Like vet bills, smoke. Yeah, I think some of those more detailed things you'd have to, so I just put a link to some program sheets that I put together based on the information Winona is presenting. And those have links to the fact sheets from these individual programs because they are highly detailed and specific. So if something, we might not go into the absolute nitty gritty here because not everybody owns livestock on this call. But if you want more of that, it should be easy to find through those downloadable sheets.
Yes, thank you. Trees. So there's the tree assistance program, and it's available for orchards and nursery tree growers to replant or rehabilitate trees, bushes, and vines lost by natural disasters. Those trees, bushes, and vines have to be for commercial use. Ornamental fruit and nut and Christmas trees produced for sale also are eligible. Does not include trees used for pulp or tinder. And they must have suffered, your loss of those trees, bushes, and vines must have been more than 15% mortality loss due to the natural disaster. So if you have a loss of at least 15%, then you apply under this, then you are eligible for this program. The loss has to be visible and obvious and not preventable through reasonable and available measures. You have to have owned the trees and bushes, of course, when the disaster occurred. To replace the eligible trees or bushes and vines, do that within 12 months from the date of your application.
So Donna, can you clarify for people who don't own the land, how do they prove that they own the trees?
You probably have receipts from if you bought the trees, or records of if you planted, say these are trees you have for a while and you planted them. So you probably have some records. Again, I would see something in your financial records, in your files, showing that you purchased the trees or that you planted the trees and when you planted them. Some records somewhere in your business should be there. Record keeping is critical, in any kind of, whether you're looking at insurance or you're looking at one of these programs offered by the government. You have to be able to prove that you were the owner, that you suffered a loss, right? Because they're not going to just pay you if you didn't suffer the loss. If it wasn't your money, your time, your energy, your effort, that went into the purchase or investment, then you didn't actually suffer the loss. Someone else did. So that's the purpose of the record keeping. You have to prove that you suffered the loss. Let's see. There's other things. There's an income cap here. Your adjusted gross income cannot exceed 900,000. I think that's a pretty high bar to meet for a lot of folks. And then there's other provisions around what your payment will be, like it's 75% of the actual cost of replanting or rehabbing, both in excess of the 15% mortality or the maximum amount eligible in practice by the FSA. So, and there is a deadline that you have to submit your supporting documentation the later of 60 days after after publication in the Federal Registry of this disaster, or within 90 calendar days of the date of the disaster or the date when the loss is apparent to the producer. So there's a time limit. And the other thing too is when you're going to try to make use of any of these programs, get in touch with someone at the FSA or one of these organizations, someone like Jeff. Get in touch with them up front and have them explain up front like what the programs are and what you need to get in place before you're hit with a disaster. And they can help you navigate, all of the detail. There is quite a bit of detail to hold in all of these programs, but they can help you navigate that up front. All right, a little bit on preparedness. So, just sort of to expand on what I was just saying. So here's some things that you can do to help you be prepared in case you have a disaster. So have a farm emergency plan that will include some of these items. In the resource section that's going to be shared with you guys, there's a link to a pretty comprehensive template for a farm emergency plan that gives you prompts for which phone numbers you need to have on hand and easily accessible and what records you need to keep. So you don't need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. So I've included the link in the bottom here of this presentation. General awareness of warning signals in your area. Prepare yourself and your employees so that you can be aware of when there might be a disaster headed your way. Make sure you have farm inventory and put together an emergency supply kit for your family or even for like if you get stuck on, in the area with your team, have emergency supplies on hand, and stock your supplies to protect your farm. Your insurance documents, make sure that you have them in a safe place. I would even, and I was just telling someone else this, it's not a bad idea. If you have if you're keeping your records somewhere near your farm and there's a fire and maybe there's an office somewhere on the farm and it burns down, what are you going to do? I would make a copy of your insurance documents and email them to myself or store them somewhere in the cloud. All of your important documents, I would do that. Because once you get off, once you get back to somewhere where you can access email or the cloud, then you can access your records and you won't be in such a panic if they burned in a fire or lost in a flood. You know what I mean? Like that's just a really good tip, to keep a backup copy somewhere on the internet. And record keeping, I've talked about it a lot, cannot emphasize enough the importance of your financial records. And I know that sometimes record keeping is the last thing people want to do, but it is literally the first thing you need. And the basis of any conversation around recovery is with your record keeping. So if that's not something that you're on top of, figure that out in terms of, when am I going to do my accounting? Am I keeping documented receipts and anything else proving ownership and interest in my farm or my livestock or whatever, so that should I experience a loss and I want to go talk to someone about getting a loan or accessing one of these programs. And even when you go to fill out your taxes, what is the basis for what you're putting on your tax return to take advantage of those losses? It's in your records. So the next webinar, December 14th, we'll talk specifically around farm financial recovery, and we'll go into more of the details around the financial aspects of recovery.
Thanks so much. And everyone, we're about to hear from Jeff, so don't sign off quite yet. Thanks so much, Winona. And I'm gonna put a link too, because Winona and Poppy Davis teach through California Farmland, teach a great business course for farmers and ranchers that will help you think through governance as well as insurance, record keeping, and all of those things. I'm putting that in the chat right now, and then I've been saying it in the chat a couple times, but we're going to be offering one-on-one support. So if any of you are producers, reach out to me and we can actually do some one-on-one support with record keeping, bookkeeping, accounting, that type of thing, in terms of financial preparedness for disaster. So thanks so much, Winona. Does anyone have Q&A before we switch over to Jeff? All right then, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Great, thank you. Share my screen here real quick. Can you all see that? Great.
Yes, now we can.
Great. So going to be talking a little bit more. So I come from a forestry background, always thinking about active management, how to really think about the future with managing whatever resource you're dealing with. So I'm going to focus a bit more on that, but it's all tied to the NRCS's Environmental Quality Incentives Program that Winona covered really quite well. Actually, the entire presentation, Winona, was really fantastic. So I'm going to be covering here more of the preparing side. So, getting your property and ready for fire, and also how our programs and what practices and what the process is to get the help to prepare that landscape for the inevitability of fire. So the one thing I want to say up front, though, most of the agencies and programs don't cover defensible space. And I always think that's a really key thing for any property owner to consider, is they really need to focus on that area, because oftentimes its embers blowing in from far outside a wildfire that are leading to homes burning in homes or structures burning in wildfires. So it's really important to focus on that area first and foremost, and then expand as well as you can beyond that. So also at the landscape scale, and I think that's really how to think of preparing for fire, is thinking about, you know, a lot of our farmland, rangeland, it's surrounded by forests or shrublands, right? So you've got intermixed conditions, really trying to focus on where you can work within that landscape to minimize that threat. Working across boundaries, working with neighbors at the watershed scale where possible, and then becoming familiar with local entities that are working in the fire hazard reduction work. That could be your CAL FIRE local office, NRCS local field offices, resource conservation districts, and fire safe councils. And in terms of NRCS and how we can assist with preparing for these conditions, we always have to identify resource concerns in offering financial assistance. Any condition where we're looking at there's just too much biomass, there's a wildfire threat associated with that, that to us is a resource concern. So any condition where you think there's a concern in that regard, we're able to assist. And even if it's just questions or more of the technical assistance, we're available to answer those calls and provide as much information as we can too. And the other thing I want to note on both of those factors, so our financial and technical assistance is free of charge. So any inquiries you put in with us, we come out free of charge and can answer your questions and help you with that financial side. But getting back to the fuel reduction side, so I think that's a key thing is to think about what can you do to prepare for the fire, what practices may help. Some of the basics, you're thinking about fire history in the area, what material is there, whether it's shrubs, forest, or other types of vegetation. Thinking about management history, how could those vegetation types be treated to minimize fire and the threat of, or minimize the damage from fire if fire were to occur across your landscape. Some of the basics, and these are practices, as I mentioned, that are offered through EQIP to help on the financial assistance side. So we have practices to help with mastication, chipping, pile and burning, thinning, pruning, prescribed fire, targeted grazing, and then even things like water sources for livestock, looking at practices like compost that can also enhance and more mitigate fire if it does occur across the landscape. Some of the strategic projects we have, really we're trying to prepare people or start having people consider prescribed fire and the eventual implementation of prescribed fire where applicable. And so a lot of the practices are implementing things to permit that to be something considered down the line. So fire breaks, fuel breaks, shaded fuel breaks, and the methods are all pretty similar. And we do have financial assistance to help you prepare in those situations where it applies. For the key focus, I think, for a lot of the shrubland and more ranches, you've got a lot of vegetation that's either coming back or encroachment of Douglas fir, things like that. So a lot of times you're looking at using heavy equipment to reduce those fuel loads, break up the continuity, really trying to get material into smaller sizes that will decompose or will stay to the forest or stay to the floor, the surface of the landscape if a fire were to come through. And again, these are all practices that we can even come out and just advise and provide information if it gets into something where it's something there's interest in the financial assistance side. We can get that process started, whichever help you need. And then the maintenance, once a lot of the work's been done, we've got things like prescribed fire, targeted grazing, use of herbicide, and then all the other things we talked about too. And then a key thing that I think a lot of people don't think about with orchards and vineyards, a lot of that, there are often woody material on the floor of those orchards or vineyards, and I think it's really advisable to remove as much of that as possible. Really just trying to think about if a fire did come through, how do we keep it to the surface? So quick wrap up here. Really, when thinking about preparing for fire, think of the fire history. How long has it been since the fire has been through the area? what's been done surrounding the area to prepare for that, what's the objectives of the entire operation. As I said, defensive space is typically not covered, so really thinking about that first and foremost, trying to protect any structures from fire and trying to remove a lot of that flammable material surrounding structures. And then really looking at the landscape scale, working with neighbors, working with local fire councils, trying to get landscapes in a way that you know, fire is going to happen. Let's make sure it doesn't damage our landscapes to the degree that we've seen the last several years. Thinking about what practices best prepare and mitigate, and really focusing on those first, getting the practices applied, and then maybe follow-up practices to maintain. And just thinking, you know, how do we live with something that we're bound to see happen? So, and some really good websites that I think are useful for discovering more information here. One of the key ones is readyforwildfire.org. So really look at that one. Wildfirerisk.org is a great one. And then there's some prescribed burn associations that I think are advisable, especially for ranches, more so than cropland situations. But, you know, reach out, get involved with that. And then, of course, your local NRCS service centers. We are always there to assist and answer any questions. That is all I have.
Thanks so much, Jeff. That was fascinating and so great to know that NRCS offers all of that support. So again, I know those things always feel overwhelming, but these are practices you can be doing over time. You can choose one area for resilience that you want to work on for preparedness. But again, it's best to just do anything you can do before wildfire season. And we kind of have a wildfire season all the time now. But it can be really overwhelming. So I'm going to open up to Q&A in a second. But before I do that, I just wanted to remind all of you that Farmer Campus actually offers an online course in wildfire resilience. And so it's an extremely robust course. We go from understanding fire ecology and cultural burning to the nitty gritty of preparedness, recovery, response, and then even like ecologically, how you can shift your farm practices to be more resilient. And then we are also going to be releasing a mini online course on exactly this topic, financial preparedness and recovery for disaster. And that will include resources like we shared today, but it'll also have videos on insurance, how to get prepared in that way, and case studies from farmers and ranchers that have been impacted in recovery and recovered. And that's a really helpful just to learn from. We have podcasts too from them. So stay tuned, and I'll tell you more about that through email and how to get involved. I'm going to drop these links in the chat. We also have a Farming Through Wildfire season workbook that we're putting together. We have the small version ready right now, and that's activities that you can do right now on your farm that will help set you up for resilience. So I'm going to share that. We'll be releasing the full version next year. So if you download this one, you'll get the new one next year. And then I just want to remind you, we have December 14th, we'll have one that goes fully into recovery on that side of things. And then we have an insurance workshop in January. So stay tuned for all of those. I'm going to put these in the chat for you. And now I just want to first thank you so much to Winona and Jeff. Everybody go ahead and take yourself off mute and just you can say thank you to all of them. And then we can start taking questions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. And I also want to thank Amber. Amber Schatt is from CAF, and CAF is our partner in all of our other wildfire work, and is a great resources. And CAF has lots of awesome resources. You can also find us at EcoFarm, where CAF and Farmer Campus will be presenting together at EcoFarm on wildfire resilience too. Any questions for these folks or for me?
I'm learning to step back. Sorry, I always have a lot of questions, so thank you for bearing with me there. And probably a lot of this makes your brain explode too, right? Because it's like very detailed. So I think the more specific questions you have as you're going through this yourself, like reach out to any one of us, right? Because we may not know the answer ourselves, but we can usually find the right person. And yeah, it's just sort of a process, I think, of piecing it together. But I wanted to piggyback on that and say that a couple of our advisory council members for the Wildfire Resilience Program are putting together a defensible space or infrastructure protection specific training for farmers and ranchers, because we know that some of that stuff that's out there, it's not that it's not good, but it's more for like single family home type settings. So we're going to work on that. And I put a link in the chat as well to an existing UCCE, UCCE website that's really great that goes into the specifics. So I just wanted to note that, because some people are like, great, 50-foot zone, what does that actually mean, right? Like, what is the frequency of maintenance on my gutters, or all those specific things. So that site does a really good job of diving deep into that. I don't know, I think I'll leave it at that, sorry.
All right, well, we can end early then. And again, I think I see some of you are from nonprofits, so please share a lot of this information with your own network, because especially if you're serving farmers, we're trying to get this out to as many people as possible. Like I said at the beginning of this, farmers and ranchers tend to rate this type of education as the lowest thing they want to learn about, but the people who've been impacted by wildfire actually rate this as the most crucial information. So the more we can get this out and get it in front of farmers and ranchers before wildfire strikes, the better. So we would love your support in getting that out there. We have yet to set a time for the December 14th workshop, but I will get back to you on that. Everybody who signed up, I'll send a link out as soon as I have that site for tickets soon. And again, I'm Katie from Farmer Campus. I've put my email in the chat a couple times. Please reach out to us if you have specific questions or want to collaborate, or have any more resources that weren't shared here. And then I'm sure Jeff and Winona would love to hear from you as well. And they both shared their information as well, but you can always email me if you'd like to be in touch with them. And please join the wildfire course, even if you just want to look for resources. We have so much material in there, and we keep that one self-paced so that people can cherry pick the information rather than having to take the whole course. So definitely check that online course out. It's free as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your morning with us. Thank you to Jeff and Winona and Amber, and I hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.